أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأولين والآخرين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد Assalamu alaikum Runtings Rude Boy Nabil Aziz from BecomingTheAlphaMuslim.com and the Becoming the Alpha Muslim podcast. Welcome to another episode. And if you're a non-Muslim, let me just explain what I said at the start, because that's Arabic, and unless you know Arabic, you wouldn't understand that. Basically, it's a prayer that Muslims recite before the beginning of any address. We start off by seeking refuge with God Almighty from Satan, and then we invoke God's name, seeking His aid and blessings. And then we praise God, who is the Lord of all creation. And then we exalt the mention of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And we do the same for his family and his companions. And Assalamu alaikum is a greeting. Many of you would know that. Today's episode is just me on my own, and there's a reason for that. I'm trying to change the way I deliver content on the website, so I'm trying to publish on a schedule, one post and one podcast per week. The podcast will be related to the post. I'm still going to do the interviews, so when the interviews do come up, it's going to be a separate post or a separate, entry on the website. So I've been binging on this Bruce Lee podcast for the past week or so. Back to back, almost on 2x speed whenever I'm driving or I'm in a position to listen. And the Bruce Lee podcast is hosted by his daughter, Shannon Lee, and her chief marketing officer, Sharon Lee, and they're not related. Basically, the Bruce Lee podcast is a deep dive into Bruce Lee's philosophy, and every episode they basically take one aspect of or one piece of his writing or some profound, philosophical statement that he said, and sort of break it down, try to analyze it, see what they can, learn from it. And they talk about how you can apply aspects of of his philosophy to your own life. So they'll give you like action steps. And during the podcast, they have a segment called the Bruce Lee Moment, which is basically they get fan mail, emails, or messages from Bruce Lee fans or random people who weren't Bruce Lee fans but came across the podcast. They basically message them and tell the hosts about how some aspect of Bruce Lee's life or philosophy helped them improve their own lives in some way. And that segment is actually basically the inspiration for this week's post and the episode of my own podcast. So that's why the title of this podcast episode is My Bruce Lee Moment. For the post, basically, there was an interview Shannon Lee gave two years ago on Reddit, which I'm sure a lot of people would have read, but for my audience, it's possible that many of you would not have read it, so there is some benefit in presenting that interview to you in whole. Also, I did a lot of work to make it much easier to read, because Reddit threads are generally, if you're unfamiliar with the format, they're a little bit not so accessible for noobs. And I included a lot of additional, images and video clips to make the reading experience more interactive and enjoyable. In 1971, Bruce Lee, and this is 2 years before he died, he gave an interview on the Pierre Berton show with Pierre Berton. It's the only interview that exists of him where he's speaking entirely in English. This interview actually was dubbed the lost interview because it was presumed lost until it was the footage was found and it was aired in 1994, if I'm not mistaken. And in it, is being interviewed by Pierre Burton, and they talk a lot about his philosophy, his Eastern philosophy or whatever philosophy that he lives by. There was one segment where he talks about why he doesn't stick to any particular fighting style. And he talks about how, to him, fighting is just the way of expressing himself honestly, without lying to himself. And he talks about how he can sort of present a really cocky attitude and show some really fancy movement to wow the audience, as opposed to really honestly expressing himself through movement, and he says to reach that level where your movement is a true and honest expression of yourself, it takes a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work where you're constantly practicing yourself and improving your body and improving your mind and improving your reflexes and things like that, so that when you punch, it's really you that's punching. It's not some pre-planned routine or pre-planned movement. It's really you being fully present in the moment and acting in such a fluid way where you're truly sort of quote unquote one with the punch. And that has a lot of parallels to our own lives as Muslims. So much of our expression of Islam is, I don't want to call it contrived, but it seems a little fake, a lot of us will, wear the outer garments or present ourselves externally as good Muslims. It might be just to keep up airs, or it might really be that we are that religious, but a lot of what we do, a lot of what we say, a lot of how we behave, it feels a little fake. And for me, there was some sort of realization that I came to, and I've written about it previously on the blog. You can check out my post called How to Be Authentically Muslim, where I felt like I was not able to be myself as a quote-unquote, practicing Muslim. It wasn't that I was trying to be, that I wanted to express some form of irreligiosity or lewdness or something like that, but there's a certain way that, quote-unquote practicing or religious Muslims are expected to behave. You're expected to talk a certain way, to dress a certain way, to behave a certain way. And that, for me, it was very sort of constricting. I felt like I was trying to juggle two identities. Me, I'm really loud. I joke at inappropriate moments. I laugh a lot. My laugh is very loud and booming. Sometimes I have a short temper. I have all these quirks, or sometimes I guess some of them you could call personality flaws even, that are quintessentially me. And I felt like, as someone who's trying to be religiously observant as much as possible, I felt like I was being, put in a box, as it were. And it's hard to do, first of all, because you're lying to yourself, and two, it's very draining on you mentally and emotionally. So I was trying to find a way to just, be a good Muslim, as the best Muslim I can be, but be who I am, as I am, and then you guys have to, take me as I am, or take it or leave it, as it were. And the time when it really, really took effect was when I started becoming the Alpha Muslim. I could have, like other Islamic websites, I could have presented the material in a certain way, sort of, a prescriptive way where it's the conversation is kind of lecturing, and I could have presented myself in a certain way, but the very first post on my website was me telling you guys my story, and it's not a really good heroic backstory. I really was not a very good person for most of my life, and I wanted to share that with you guys and share all the shit I've been through, because in order for me to, I guess, not for me to help you and for us to help each other, you have to have some sort of level of trust. And if I present myself as some sort of expert Islamic guru, or trying to like a sheikh, as it were, that wouldn't have been me. First of all, it wouldn't have been me expressing myself honestly, and second of all, there are so many websites like that where it's very the content is Islamic website where the content is super prescriptive, and you don't get to feel any personality of the person who's writing. It's very contrived sort of content. It's basically you're telling people what you think they want to hear, as opposed to giving them what they really want to hear. So now I had a choice. I had a choice whether I could present this material in a way that expresses myself and possibly not appeal to a mass audience, and possibly get even a lot of hate for it. And I ended up taking the choice where I express myself authentically, and I believe it's paying off, even though there have been situations where I've had to face a lot of criticism for the way I present myself, the way I present my material, the topics I choose to cover. Because how many Islamic websites have you seen where a guy is writing an article about Islamic feminism, oxymoron level over 9,000, and basically dissing the crap out of these these so-called Muslim feminists? And how many Islamic websites have you seen where the author is writing basically a guide on halal and haram sex acts and talking about Muslims like to F2? So I think it's paying off, and I'm from the response of the audience, I think it was the right move on my part, because the worst thing that could happen when you start a website is try to be mass market and appeal to everyone. If you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody. And even worse than that is if the response to your website is lukewarm or mediocre. If you don't polarize people with your website. The response to becoming the alphamuslim.com has been people either hate it or they love it, and that's the sweet spot for me. That's the spot I want to be in. So sort of internalizing this particular philosophy of Bruce Lee is something that helped me a lot in coming to terms with create first of all my own expression as a Muslim, and in creating the concept for becoming the Alpha Muslim and delivering the content in a way that you will find enjoyable. So that's basically the episode for today. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please leave me a rating and review on iTunes. That's how other people can find the podcast and benefit from it. If you basically show some love for the podcast and leave us a rating and review. It does take quite a bit of effort to create this content, so I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a rating and review on iTunes. That's like the third time I said it now, but okay. Anyways, jazakumullah khair for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace.